a big picture thinker. Well, he's been called a lot of things before, and that's one of them. And he's an expert in soils and fertiliser. Wayne's the founder, or one of the founders of exciting Agtech company Laconik, which uses data analytics and growers' own information to deliver variable rate fertiliser prescriptions, and enables growers to put Laconics and others' fertiliser recommendations to the test in their paddock. So I'd like to introduce Wayne and bring him up to talk about better ways to make fertiliser decisions.
How we currently make fertiliser decisions, this is probably what most of us start with. Some sort of recipe on a per paddock basis based on what we did last year. And most of the time, most of the programs that do these days, they will have a recipe for barley, wheat, canola, copy and paste it, it goes absolutely everywhere. And then that gets summed up and we have tables that we then go and shop around and figure out where we're going to get those products from. Most of the things that we do in business, in Business 101, says that you plan, then you implement, then you measure how that's gone. Once you've got those measurements, you then review to then plan again. Most of you who are running successful businesses, I'm hoping that this is what you do, whether it's in a formal process or in your head. This is how we do fertiliser decisions. We plan by getting those recipes based on what we did last year. We implement because that's the bit that we love doing. We love the implementation because that's the doing stuff. That's what we're farmers for. We do the doing stuff. Then we might look at what we kind of did with some of the fertiliser and we surmise. We come up with ideas that, yeah, well, where it kind of run out, didn't go so good, and where I changed my K rate by 5 kilos, I think it went better on. We don't actually measure it, we just surmise, and then we go back to the plan stage and we go through the whole process. That's never going to change until we do something radically different. What's your return on investment on your fertiliser expenditure? I've asked people this for years and no one can give me an answer. I'll hear people say, I'm not going to invest in fertiliser unless for every dollar I invest, I'm going to make $3. Otherwise, I'm not going to do it. Okay, where are you now? Don't know. Very hard to actually figure out what the return on investment of fertiliser is. What we did is we went to fertiliser company trials and took the various treatments, normal kind of fertiliser treatments, and compared that to nil fertiliser, to see what the return on investment was. And you can see there that across about 300 trials, the return on investment averaged 80%. So in those trials, which I'm guessing fertiliser companies locate in responsive soils, for every dollar you invested, you got $1.80 back on average. But you can also see that there were some pretty good ones where you got $4 or $5 back, and there were quite a lot, almost 1/3 of those where you actually wasted your money. So, what we're a little bit about is this measure thing, because we'll all say, the whole industry says, we need to improve fertiliser efficiency. Well, where the hell are you now? How are you going to know if you've improved it if you don't know what you're doing now? How are you figuring out if what you're investing now is actually profitable if you're not actually measuring it? This is what we can do now. We can take your, in this case, 11 kilos of phosphorus applied across a couple of hundred hectares, and we can locate trials in that paddock, proper trials, to scientifically prove your rate of return on a product we can figure out what your economic optimum rate of that product should have been, and we can figure out from that how much money you've wasted pretty much across every square inch of your paddock from getting your fertiliser rate wrong. So in this case, most of it was from under-fertilising, so you've got two costs for fertiliser. One is where you waste it because you don't need it, over-fertilising, and under-fertilising, which is probably more costly because you miss out on revenue, obviously. In this case, about $30 per hectare from using that blanket rate everywhere. And you can see that in some areas that cost was more than others, and because most of that's from under-fertilising, we need higher rates on those zones. Makes perfect sense. So this is, probably for the first time we've actually been able to say what are the consequences, the economic consequences of your current fertiliser regime. That then feeds in to optimum phosphorus rate in this case. So that is what should have been used in the 2018 season instead of the blanket rate of 11. If we go back to that, some of you may say it's only $30 a hectare. And clients who I deal with, who I would call infinitely profitable, doesn't matter what they do, they seem to make money. $30 a hectare might not be a big number. For other businesses, it's probably one that you'd start to get worried about, to then start thinking about, hang on, if that's money I'm leaving on the table, how do I realise that? How do I get that? That's by going towards this optimum P rate thing. So if you think about precision agriculture, variable rate technologies, I think it's been around 40 years. The adoption of it is probably 5 to 7% of Australian grain growers. There's been no reason to actually turn that sort of stuff on. There's been no value proposition, there's been no profitable reason to actually get off your arse and do something with it. This sort of stuff starts to put numbers on it to say, that's probably where you need to head to. We can convert that into a variable rate application map. You might say that's only based on the 2018 season. Seasonal differences, things happen. When we test this with growers and say, will that be of any value to you? Given that that's based on 2018 season, will that be of any value to you in the 2019 season? The answer is a resounding yes, because we don't have any other good information like that that's based on profit. We know that the 2019 season will be different. What the ongoing process is that we then repeat the process of putting trials across that paddock again in 2019. We get more information, we start to build a massive database of your data. So this is not some white lab coat person from Ciro or a fertiliser company saying what should happen on your place. This is exactly what's happening on your place. We basically start to build a predictive model for your soils under your management. That's how the trials are kind of laid out in the paddock. With your VR stuff, you don't even know that you're doing it. At harvest, you don't even know that you're recording results. For each one of those trials, we can do a trial report where we can scientifically analyse the results from each one of those trials to see if any yield changes are actually due to the treatments that you applied or whether they're due to chance. And we can also, for what it's worth, we can track things like NDVI during the season. I'm not sure that anyone's actually figured out a good use for NDVI yet, but people ask for it. So it's pretty easy to get these days, so we put it on. And that's how we end up with a profit gap map as a starting point, or a stock take of where you're at now to how you then move forward, or in fact to decide whether you actually do want to change. Because if this type of map comes out and says that on average you're losing $5 to $10 a hectare, I'm pretty sure a lot of people will say it's not worth doing anything about it. If nothing else, as a grower, it makes you sleep well, knowing that you've got things pretty right. And as a fertiliser advisor or consultant, this would be a godsend, because probably for the first time ever, you could actually say, yes, I'm providing good advice. Where are we currently at, and why are we moving towards this kind of way of improving fertiliser decisions? Currently, soil testing is held up as the industry's best management practice. It's what we've always done. It's probably a technology that's 40, 45 years old, hasn't really changed. The irony of it really now is that it's kind of this recreational thing that we do every year. We go and collect soil tests. Irony is that most of the time you're collecting the soil tests after you've purchased your fertilisers and made your paddock plans. It's asked about now. So a few things about soil testing. There's a lot that we don't know about soil testing. There's some things that we do know about soil testing. One is that it's very hard to extrapolate from the site that you collected the sample to the next 20, 30, 40, 50 hectares. The result that you get in your little few square metres, how does that apply as you move across your paddock? So we know that. We know that if you're provided with soil testing, it alters and changes and influences the products that you buy and how much you buy of them. And we also know that soil testing is not an exact science. We've dragged down and built a database of several thousand trials right across Australia, where we can assess the accuracy of soil tests. So this is using the Kojonup test, been the industry standard for a long time, on the x-axis, and you've got the relative yield on the y-axis. Now the relative yield is the starting yield as a percentage portion of the nutrient non-limiting yield. So the lower the number, the more responsive it should be. That's the three crop types there, and you can see that there's, well, at any given Kojonup level, you can get a whole range of starting yields. So its accuracy of predicting responsiveness is not that good. And you could say there for wheat, for instance, that you've got a 1 in 2 chance of actually predicting whether you need any phosphorus. So you could be facetious and say, instead of going and putting a hole, driving to a part of the paddock and putting some soil samples in to see if you're going to get a phosphorus response, you could drive there and toss a coin, save yourself time, and be just as accurate. Now, we could be shot down by saying, okay, that measurement of coal phosphorus is only one of many factors. You need to take into account the phosphorus absorption capacity of the soil, pH, etc. When we do that, as a predictor of phosphorus rate, where the observed optimum P rate is on the x-axis and the predicted through your standard prediction models is on the y-axis, you can see that there's not a hell of a lot of relationship there. What we call a monkey on a typewriter. Put a monkey on a typewriter, sooner or later they're going to spell a right word. But most of the time they're probably going to be wrong. We can do the same for potassium. and having potassium give people the shits at the moment, trying to figure out whether you're going to get a response or not. That's the same thing for potassium. Again, run it through a model, and not a hell of a lot of relationship there. And as anyone who's looked at soil tests would know, we've seen very low soil test results come back where you don't get a response, and we're seeing very high soil test results come back where you do get a response. And those data tending to support that. Nitrogen is probably even worse. So what's changed since the 1970s when soil testing was introduced? Several things. We now look at things spatially. I hope none of you are still using those hand-drawn mud maps that some clients show me. We've now got the capacity of easily looking at stuff at a broad scale and being able to do it accurately. Data collection is gone through the roof. Every time you drive across the paddock these days, you're recording multiple things. Every time a satellite goes over, it's recording multiple things. The amount of data that we have access to now is just phenomenal. Variable rate technology, precision ag, whatever you want to call it. This is this sleeping thing that needs to be awakened. It's been around for a long time. It is getting very, very easy to make that happen now. We need a reason to actually get off our arse and put it into action, and that's going to be profit. Part of that technology now makes on-farm experimentation so much easier. That you can do it, you can design trials, you can implement them, you can harvest them, you can analyse them really, really quickly and well now. And then you've also got, every day there's a new sensor that's picking up something. I'm not really sure that what a lot of them do. They'll all say that they provide actionable insights, whatever that is. I think they're just probably, most of them are just adding another piece of a jigsaw puzzle to one that's already overcomplicated already. And we now have amazing data analytics and machine learning. Now, this sort of stuff we've got going on in our lives absolutely everywhere, whether you know it or not. So every time you're online searching for something, there's some data analytics person in the background thinking, what can we hit you with that you will purchase? If you're on social media, I believe that's how the whole thing works. Tesla, great business model. Sell someone a really expensive car, get them to drive it around and record everything, so we can use the machine learning or the data it records to make an even better car, so we can sell it again and again and again. Siri, all those sorts of things. Face recognition, so that you don't have ugly bouncers who are going to throw you out anymore. When you walk in, face recognition, bang, you're out. Right? This stuff is happening everywhere. Green on brown, spray technology, green on green. It's all machine learning stuff. Fertilisers, the most expensive variable input, have somehow, up to now, missed out on all this. The blowtorch now, using all these things, is going to come on to fertiliser decisions. Things like this, where you might know parts of your paddock that need more muriate and potash, might need more nitrogen, might need more lime from, you've soil tested for pH, you know what's better country, whatever. the ability to actually just make that happen and put that into your machines has been a bit of a bugbear for a lot of people. These days, this sort of stuff, you can do this in 30, 40 seconds. Draw a box of crayons, basically a piece of paper, bang, straight into the rate controller. And as you're doing that, you might actually want to check what it is that you're putting on. So, because you've got your A/B lines in there, you can go and design your own trial and put on whatever rates of product you want to see if you're going to get a response. So at the moment we've got guys out there with a lot of in-season nitrogen trials, potassium rates, you name it, just seeing whether the compound is actually making any difference, their compound fertiliser. And then that all ending up in a variable rate application prescription as a shape file or whatever it is, straight through my John Deere or whatever, even through a USB into the rate control. It's all pretty easy these days. Then once you've got the trials and you can analyse the results that come back to see if the rates that you put in actually had a real effect, you can then check the profitability of the fertiliser that you put on. And if there are no differences in yield, it's pretty easy to figure out your rate of return and your profit because everything you put on got wasted. If there is a yield response, then you need to figure out was that profitable, because obviously yield response and profit are two completely different things. This is some stuff that we did last year, and this was the top-up last application of nitrogen. So the grower had already put on 40 kilos of nitrogen. We had a recommendation system that was based upon predicting yield, because yield is the biggest determinant of nitrogen rate. So we predict yield and then use that to then predict nitrogen rate. We were coming up with recommendations at this time of the season of nil or no nitrogen. The grower wanted to put an additional 26 kilos of nitrogen on. We put the trials in, and these are the rates of return that he got across, I think it's 8 paddocks. Now, we haven't necessarily shown this to this grower because he's, I think, out there blissfully unaware of what happened last year. Probably very confident that he made some really good decisions. When you look at the data, you'd have to question that. This is across 54 trials where we did the same thing last year, where we compared our predictions to what the others were going to say, to what we call the incumbent. And you can see there, 2019 was a pretty tough season, but this prediction system made about $6 or $7 per hectare across all those. We think there's a lot of room for improvement in that still to come. Those predictions were based on this, part of those predictions was based on this sort of analysis. I showed you that one earlier where on the x-axis you've got the actual optimum rate that was in the trial compared to predicted. So the predicted in that case comes from your standard normal nitrogen prediction model. They're the red dots. The green ones is the machine learning approach that we took. The red dots are based on soil tests, organic carbon, padding rotation, all your standard things that you would put into a nitrogen prediction model. The green ones are based on paddock rotation. That's the only factor that went into that. No soil tests, none of that sort of stuff. Normally, if you're going to parameterise a model to predict nitrogen rates, the biggest thing that you don't know, and you take a guess at, is what your potential yield is. Because we're looking at this in hindsight, we know what the potential yield is, so this is complete knowledge. The red dots, those models, they've been in development for probably 35, 40 years. Those green dots, just 2 hours work from a machine learning guru. So that sort of information combined with positive results in the field gives us confidence that we can improve things dramatically. What we do know is that the amount of data that you're getting in is going to increase. And we are getting to the point where we've got so much data that it's almost getting confusing. And Rabobank, Wes Lefroy and others put this out not long ago and basically said that if we're going to use this data to make more profitable decisions, this is way beyond what's in any of our heads. We've got to move to another system which the Googles of the world, the Amazons of the world are already using. That we think is the starting point. Because until you realise what you're leaving on the table, nothing is going to change. We will continue just to do what we've always done. Recreational soil testing every year. We know that most of you get the results and don't really look at them. That's why a lot of people give up on soil testing regardless of the soil test results, get recommended the same stuff, do what you've always done. This is you cannot argue with this sort of stuff. This is your data under your management system. It's unique to you, it's not a prediction, this is reality. To get to that sort of stuff where we can recommend optimum fertiliser rates, once we get to that, then I think we'll be on a pathway to much, much better fertiliser decisions and more profit from the stuff. Thank you.
Any questions of Wayne while he's here?
I just got a question with one of the slides with the K. Did you take into consideration the pH of the soil when you were making those decisions, or was that taken into case whether it was acid or alkaline?
On those graphs?
Yeah.
No. We run those through industry best models. That's all we've done. Yeah. Because we've got that data, the other thing that we're actually doing is using machine learning to see if we can improve predictions from soil testing.
Yeah.
Just as a bit of a giggle thing to do, but we know even if we did that, we might be able to predict well what happens at this point, but it doesn't extrapolate to every other point in between here and the next soil test site.
Thank you.
Where do you see tissue testing amongst all that? You talked a lot about soil testing, but no mention about, the tissue testing and the variability, and then also your first slide about the review. How many review that?
I'll ask you about the second question because I don't understand it at this point in time.
Oh.
So I'll answer the first one and let you think about it.
Yeah.
Tissue testing, look, if the interpretation is right, it's kind of the ultimate measure of what is available to the plant. Soil testing, you're trying to predict what the plant will take up. Plant testing, you're measuring what the plant has taken up. So again, you can't argue about it. You can argue about whether the amount that you've measured is adequate or inadequate. I think one of the biggest problems with it is still going to be, how do I take something that from a little row of plants I've collected here and then extrapolate that to the next 10, 20 hectares? How do I do that? I see it having a pretty big role when you're trying to figure out why there's a visual problem. How do you go in there and identify what that is? The second question was the review.
Yeah, review. How many people do that at the end of the season? You know, like all small businesses, like you said, and I don't think it happens enough. Like, you know, that whole conduit of doing a review at the end of the season and, you know, what we applied and what we did, and I don't think we do much learnings from that.
I'm focusing particularly on fertiliser. In our surveys, particularly of the farm business management consultants, they try to do that the measure and review. I mean, they certainly do it with your financial numbers, because that's going to be a real important point for your decisions for next year. When we talk to them about the information that they're using to assess fertiliser spend, they will tell us that they use what you did last year as the starting point. They might go and talk to a couple of agronomists about whether those numbers need to go up or down a little bit. We've run some of this stuff past agronomists and farm business management consultants. And the farm business management consultants in particular have said, if you can show me 2 trials across that whole property that show me some indication of the profitability of fertiliser, I will have 2 more bits of information than I've currently got. If we can show them whole farms of the return on investment on fertiliser, it's going to be a bit of a game changer. Our gut feel is that, from what we've done, is that most farmers are not applying enough fertiliser, and that it's the profit loss from lost yield uplift that's the big killer.
I was comment on the tissue testing aspect. From my point of view, is, as you said, for that diagnostic approach, the comparative approach, but also the value I see it is in those on-farm trial scenarios where you've got multiple rates, so you can actually then tissue test across those rates to give you an uptake aspect of how well the fertiliser is being absorbed and used, and then you can come back to your yields after that.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting how good that sort of information is as we move towards more on-farm experimentation, where growers are putting in strict trials. Because it becomes pretty hard to collect soil samples, plant tests, and particular grain samples when you've got strips that are 36 metres wide and a couple hundred metres long of where you're actually going to collect those samples. But yeah, good diagnosis. Diagnostics.
Even your trials are talking about as well, so they're a bit smaller, a bit more localised.
We've tried it in the past, it's still pretty hard. And yes, you can get some results back, but your level of confidence around them because of the sampling thing is pretty low anyway.
With your RO, return on investment, are you just taking that from like the yield data, or are you also getting the grain quality data as well? And how, if you are getting the grain quality, are you taking that just from the truckload, or are you taking that from individual spots?
The best grain quality data we can get is people got protein monitors. Otherwise, it's very hard, for all those reasons I just said, to get.
So the trials that were
quality
indicated,
samples.
they were actually harvested with a header, they weren't with a plot header or anything?
Yeah. This is all, everything that we're doing
Yeah.
is farmer done.
Yep.
Just on the phosphorus story, In terms of how farming systems have changed over time, you got any thoughts about that? So historically you would have top dressed it and it's been mixed in through some sort of cultivation. Nowadays it's a lot more targeted, lower rates, in furrow. How do you think that relates back to the soil testing story and some of the variabilities in the responses that you see?
I think what you're asking is a $64 million question, which probably, because I can't really give you an answer, probably says it's going to be a long time until some of those things get sorted out. We're still debating about whether you take one core in last year's road compared to 9 or 10 or 11 or 12 in between. I think that's going to take a while, even that simple issue to sort out. What we're talking about is moving away from prediction to measurement.
Yeah, we get
Wayne, have you... Sorry. Wayne, I was just going to ask you, you've done all this with crops and stuff. What about, have you done much work with pastures? Because that must be another big issue for fertiliser as well.
No? Right.
Same question.
No, I've been thinking about it. Probably the only way that because we can't probably measure sheep production. It's probably going to have to go back to the old sort of stuff of exclusion zones for livestock and trying to measure pasture production.
Wayne, those drip trials you're talking about, can you draw anything? Are they just P, or what happens if you've got a compound of P and K? Can we get any information from that?
Yeah, we've got quite a few blokes who are just varying the rate of compound on the bar, just to see whether they're P and N, or N, P and K, whether the compound is actually making any difference. If it is, well then next year they'll probably actually try and tease those out. If you've got a NFP product on the bar, and UAN for instance, it's pretty easy to basal out if you've got varied rate on the UAN, to basal that out so you can just look at a P response.